Well, good afternoon, everyone. We're going to start now. It's noon, so welcome. I'm Alan Winchester. I'm with HB Solutions, and today we're going to run a webinar on cybersecurity and in particular ransomware and how it impacts people's networks and infrastructure. The program is hosted by HB Solutions, and the members of the panels are all members of one of our service offerings called HB Access. HB Access is a unique service because it approaches information security from the perspective of risk evaluation and the methods an organization can take to reduce their risks so that they can achieve more. There are a lot of members who are part of the service, but today we wanted to highlight three of the members from IT consulting, forensics, and insurance coverage. They have their views on ransomware and how it impacts, and we're going to look at some of the situations that come up in ransomware and see how their perspectives and their risk approach goes to it. So one of the members, Tad, just say your voice so people hear you.
Hi, good morning.
Tad?
Nope, I'm here,
okay.
Alan. Sorry about that.
Oh, that's great. So that's Tad. You're going to hear the dulcet tones of Tad's voice. Tad has 12 years in the national security space and was responsible for helping set government policies and technology investments in the technology sector. Tad's approach to risk is broad-based, and while in government, his focus was not only in cyber warfare, but he also focused on explosives, counterterrorism, and chemical weapons. From the other side of that spectrum, we have Alex Rosati, who joined us recently. Alex is going to share his views from the insurance perspective, and we'll talk about some of the things your organization can do to hedge its risk. So we're going to hear many approaches from a technological, human training, and approach basis that companies can take to reduce their risk profile, and they certainly should look at that, but ultimately they're going to bump up against a wall. And one of the ultimate hedges to that is to buy insurance. So Alex is going to address that point of it. And then the last member of the panel, but certainly not the least, is Rick Schutz, who's our sort of chief technologist within the group. And Rick has certifications in information security and other areas of network configuration and design. And his usual work is consulting with organizations on how to operate and staff IT systems generally, and also with an eye towards preserving information security. So in today's session, it's going to sort of be segmented into the following parts. The first is sort of a background that you're going to hear on ransomware in general and what it does to your networks. Not too much focus because I assume most everyone here dialing in is familiar with it, so we're going to go through quickly. We're going to look at a scenario that is an amalgamation of several ransomware events that our group has dealt with that probably could have gone better. They had a number of challenges, and rather than identifying any client, what we've done is sort of amalgamated the worst of, and we're going to talk about how it went wrong, what it is, and then the next part of it's going to be to talk about the steps an organization can do to reduce its risk, how in light of these things it can reduce its risk, including stuff like having a breach response plan. And then lastly, we're going to talk about how HB Access can help your organizations implement some of the things we've talked about during the webinar today. So with that as background, you all should be in the presentation because of the number of people, and there are a lot of you dialed in, which is great and exciting, and I'm glad there's some people interested in it, but we've muted it because it would be a cacophony if everyone started speaking. So you can type your questions into there's a little spot in the section there. Raise your hand, type a question in. We will see what you want to ask, and I'll interrupt whoever it is that you direct the question to, or if you didn't direct it, I'll find someone that I can send it to answer it. So please don't be hesitant to type a question in. So we've gone over the backgrounds. Here you'll see everyone has no hair. I don't know what that has to do with cybersecurity and ransomware, but apparently hair is a deficit. So that's just something you'll notice. Yeah, you probably lose it. Rick, could you tell the people a little bit about ransomware and how it works?
I will. Thanks, Alan, for that great introduction for all of us and the welcoming of all the people on the line. And I just realized I've been on the safe side of information security. Unlike Tad, I never had to deal with bombs, explosives, or anything incendiary in any way, fortunately. So, like the slide says, ransomware is a type of malware, and by definition, of course, it's not good, right? It's mal. It's different, though, ransomware is, from other types of malware in a couple of ways. One is that it, upon execution of the virus, renders all of the files, your files, that it touches, inaccessible. You will not be able to open them because through the use of a very strong and complex algorithm, ransomware will encrypt your files. So the fact that it encrypts them and makes them inaccessible to you is bad. The next piece of bad news is, in order for you to gain or regain access to your files, specifically through the decryption of those files, you must, in many cases, pay the ransom demanded by the bad actors, right? Fortunately, the ransoms aren't always large. And you'll want to think about how you respond and whether you pay that ransom right away, and we'll get to that later on in the presentation. But the third piece of bad news about this is that ransomware, if it can spread across your network pretty quickly and encrypt thousands of files in a matter of minutes, in very few minutes. And it can do that on your network if you haven't segmented your network. So in other words, if a guy who works in finance has access to HR and IT systems, and that person in finance launches the virus, then it may very quickly and easily spread to the HR and IT systems. So you want to prevent access within your organization for your own people from systems to which they do not need access.
So Rick, obviously the title of this program is Would You Trust a Thief? And you mentioned that you pay ransom to the person in the form of Bitcoin. How does that work?
Well, you first have to understand what a Bitcoin is, and then you have to find a place to buy a Bitcoin, right? So you find a place to buy a Bitcoin in exchange and send it on to the person who created the ransomware, who's holding you hostage.
And I guess also you're banking on the thief, the guy that's done this attack to you, to actually honor the ransom that he paid, right? I mean, so you give him the Bitcoins, you're doing that in the hope that this person has some degree of honor and will now give you the keys to decrypt your system, right?
There's absolutely no guarantee that the person holding you hostage will decrypt your data. None whatsoever.
So you are in fact trusting a thief?
You are in fact momentarily trusting a thief.
So, Tad, when you look at this, how are the demands? I mean, how much extortion are you seeing in these?
In terms of dollar amount, what we're seeing is an average of somewhere in the range of $300 to $500 per computer that has been compromised. In terms of demand on a global scale, I think a really interesting and indicative fact of how important ransomware has become in the global criminal and state-sponsored marketplace is that you can now buy ransomware on a SaaS model on the black market. And so if you go on the black market right now, sure, you can buy drugs, you can buy weapons, you can buy all sorts of illicit goods, but the two most in-demand things and the two most expensive things that you will find on the black market today are, one, pre-written ransomware codes that anyone can just plug and play and use, and number two are the data packages that result from the using of those ransomware software.
Which is really disheartening. Alex, in reality, many companies choose to pay the ransom, and I guess that sparks the demand that Tad is seeing in the market. how does that work? I mean, what are you seeing from the insurance perspective in terms of how companies are dealing with the ransom?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, ransomware is a phenomenon that insurance companies haven't had a lot of experience with, but from the experiences that we've had, the problem that we see a lot of times is that the company has gone ahead and done a lot of work on its own without picking up the phone and calling professionals, and a lot of times that can have a lot of repercussions for you under your policy, and because the policies require you to cooperate with the insurance company, and if you've gone ahead and done things that have compromised your systems and or future claims that you may have, because one of the things that we have seen, just generally speaking, is that if you've exposed yourself to ransomware once, it's very likely that you could be compromised either with ransomware or some other form of attack very soon thereafter. So, it kind of behooves you to take a step back, and your first thought should be, to call in professionals and not try and do things on your own.
Hey, Alan, it's Tad. If I could just add something really quick. Rick did a really great job of encompassing, from the very large-scale perspective, what ransomware does. And then you asked him the question, would you trust the thief if you're going to pay that ransom out? But I think it's important to note that paying the ransom and getting access back to your data that has been encrypted, as Rick said, that it doesn't necessarily end there, because almost always these ransomware packages, when they're put onto your system, when they're put onto your computer, it's not just the encrypting of the data that they're doing. It's also the creation and the opening of black holes, rootkits, and exploit kits, which would allow these individuals consistent access back into your system. So if you don't call the right professionals, if you don't have that plan in place, and you just pay that ransom out, this specific situation may end there, but in the large scale, the access and the potential compromise to your system is far from over.
Yeah, and to highlight that, we were at an FBI meeting, and the agents were saying that what they're seeing now is the bad actors are, before triggering the ransomware, are surveilling the network, looking for files with the .backup extensions or folders that are, suggestive of a backup. And even if their intent is not to co-opt with a rootkit, they are in your system doing mischief because they are deleting the backup files so that you are unable to restore your network back to where it was without paying the ransom. So they're getting more and more intrusive, and I say this in a begrudgingly admiring way, but they're getting more and more sophisticated in their attacks, so it's a real risk. How an organization responds to the discovery of ransomware, and I think this is your point, Tad, can really impact what your options are next. And the knee-jerk reaction is, of course, to just get rid of it like it were a cancer or something. You want to cut it out and get rid of it quickly, but that's not necessarily best. So what we're going to do is look at some of the scenarios that we've seen. I've amalgamated sort of the nightmare where everything goes wrong into one, and it sort of highlights how poor planning can get there, and then we're going to look at, as I said in the next part, some of the risk reduction strategies you can take to lower that. So for people who have not seen it, this is an example of one of the ransomware notices that come up, and you see this red screen. So let's say that you are an organization and you see this message pop up on your screen. Important information, it gives you all the stuff. I blurred it out just because, well, it's on a web image, so there it is. But this is what the ransomware screen, if you're hit by this particular virus, looks like. So, Rick, what happened to the organization?
Well, it's pretty clear that somebody was able to get into the network to gain access to computer systems and to plant some kind of malware and these accompanying text or HTML files that alert the users on the network that their data has been encrypted.
So I think you suggested, I have your suggested answer that they've probably been breached, right? Someone got onto the network?
Yeah, so they've got perimeter defenses in the way of firewalls and antivirus software and web filtering technologies and all that, and somebody clearly breached those protective measures, those walls, right? So the network has been breached. The question now becomes, has the data been breached? And when I think about breaching the data in this case, we understand that the data's been encrypted. It's no longer accessible, so we could consider that a breach. I would extend that a bit and ask the question of whether any of the data has been exfiltrated or stolen from the network. And if that has happened, which can be very tough to determine, by the way, then the data too has been breached, in my mind, definitively.
Okay. And then, to be, just to understand the level of the encryption here, if we understand that they've put this ransomware in and the system is now encrypting the files, are you able to, if you bring in someone really smart like yourself or Tad, can you break that encryption?
If you brought in a few hundred TADs and a couple hundred RICs, we would not be able to break that encryption.
The encryption is so strong that there's just no way to decrypt it.
There is no reasonable way, if any, to decrypt it, right? The average guy in the street and the really, really, really good IT guys and security guys will not be able to decrypt it.
And I guess that's dependent upon if the bad actor executed it properly.
Well, exactly, sure. Which leads to, if executed improperly, will that bad actor, even if you pay him, be able to decrypt it?
Right. But we have seen instances where, they've got the malware in, they've got the system starting to go, but they misfired, right? So there are rare exceptions where you can intervene and stop it, but for the most part, once it's encrypted, you either are going to have to restore the system from backup or pay the ransom if that's what you elect to do.
Those are about the only choices, right?
All right. So, Tad, following up on that, to me, it's sort of obvious, but is this a crime?
It's absolutely a crime. I look at it, I say a breach is any time your system has been accessed or penetrated by somebody who should not have access to that system, who should not be there. So it's absolutely a crime. The question then becomes of how large of a crime does it become? And in this instance, I break it down into two things. There's system security, there's systems compromise, and then there's information security, data security, and data compromise. You can handle the system security because, in large part, that's your software, that's your hardware, your servers, those types of things, which can be taken offline and which can be replaced. The data is where I think you really need to focus, because one, that's what you're going to care the most about. It's your proprietary data. You don't want it out there on the street. You want control. You have clients. It's your reputation. It's your revenue. The data is where you need to focus. But very simply, the sheer fact that they have entered your system, they have committed a crime, and they have breached you. They have found a weak point in your system.
And this is where is this happening? Who's doing most of this attacking?
Yeah, so that's a really it's a great question. I saw a recent fact the other day and was having some conversations on the West Coast about this last week, that the average age of a hacker or a malicious actor attempting to do criminal behavior online in the past 2 years has dropped from 24 years old to 17 years old. And I think that sort of gets at, Alan, where you were going when you said there are these situations where, yes, they could be in your system, but they maybe have messed up the actual deployment and activation of the malware. Because in many cases, these are just young kids experimenting. It's the test, can I do it? The step up from there, from the recreational hacker, you're looking at, this is an incredibly profitable business. I said earlier that the most expensive thing that you can buy on the black market today are data packages that have been stolen. And so you're looking at organized crime networks, terrorist networks, nation states, and these are, all based around the world. We see a lot of heavy traffic coming out of the big names that you hear, Russia and China, but also out of the Ukraine, specifically the Crimea region, which we heard so much about with the Russian invasion a couple of years ago. Iran, North Korea on the state actor side, on the terrorist side, the Free Syrian Army, ISIS. Is actively using information security ransomware attacks. So it's really coming from all sides.
And it comes in how? I mean, how are you seeing this stuff coming in?
Well, we're seeing it just based on, they're looking at it purely from two angles. One is an access to data. Because if you can control the data, you have a large amount of control over the people that you're attempting to hack or steal the data from. So,
are they coming in on I'm sorry, Ted. Are they coming in on emails? What's the method? How does a company get itself infected?
Yeah, what's the mechanism?
Email, so spear phishing attacks, phone calls, social media is fast becoming one of the largest ways to deliver ransomware. There's about 600,000 Facebook profiles, Facebook accounts that are compromised every single day. And so if you think about it, if you're a Facebook user and you get on there, people all the time are clicking like, love, emoji, whatever. And what we've started seeing is that links to ransomware downloads are being hidden in these likes on these very nondescript sites. So if you think, click here to take a survey about your favorite Disney character, there is the potential that exists now more and more that when you click that link, sure, you may find out that you identify with Mickey Mouse, but you're also putting ransomware on your computer, personal computer, or on your company's network as well. So those are the really popular methods. But then again, we've also seen, just pure covert system breaches where the network is not made aware through some sort of social engineering attack. And then Internet of Things connected devices. You think back to a couple years ago, Target was hacked through their HVAC system. And when you look at the amount of devices that are connected into a network because of the ease of Wi-Fi these days, you can see that we are constantly opening ourselves up to new lines of attack.
Thanks, Ted.
Yeah. So I just want to add one thing there, Ted. It's really important to note that the method of attack by using your own people against you is something that I think should definitely be noted. And you and I talked about this last week on the West Coast. I read a statistic recently where it said that fully 60% of attacks from a cyber perspective happen because of people within your own organization, and a third of those are unintentional because of spear phishing and others. So
that's the IBM report.
Something to really, really think about as you move through this entire issue.
Alex, you're so right, Alan. I would just say that, in my opinion, the weakest part of a information security architecture will always be the human capital element. It will always be your own people. And whether they're doing it, whether they're weakening your system without even knowing, meaning that they're clicking on these things, they're giving away accounts, they're telling people about passwords without even realizing it, or in other cases they are actively attempting to compromise your system. Because we have seen that 59% of employees that have been let go from a company are found to have stolen data from that company on their way out. So really focusing on that human capital element, like Alex said, is just so important.
So I want to keep us on schedule because we promised everyone an hour. So I just want to, run it along. And I know none of you can see me making faces because we're all on the phone. But let's go. This is sort of where the scenario bends a bit to the south. And I think this is something we all could see happening, right? So pretend that this ransomware came up, the user called the help desk, a ambitious, hardworking technician takes the call, realizes what's happening, and then formats over everything in the middle of the night, restores it from backup, and then decides to call you, Rick, right? You pretend you're the CIO of the company. They call you and say, oh my God, you would not believe the night I had last night. Someone got hit with ransomware, but it's okay. I formatted over everything. I restored from backup. Everything seems to be running. We're good. What issues does that raise for you?
Well, hopefully he called me a little before my normal waking time, because I instantly would have been awake, right? My heart rate would have gone, would have skyrocketed. Because by doing what he did, that indicates to some extent that there was no breach response plan, that he had not had any training. There was no discussion about how to respond in the event of a breach. So that's an organizational red flag that we see right away, right? If we drill down a bit into the IT aspect of it and some of the more semi-technical considerations, who's to say that the backups that he restored were in fact good backups, right? Who's to say that the data is now accessible? The backups could have failed. They could have been corrupted before the restoration process. And so there's danger in that alone. He also, if a backup hadn't run immediately before he formatted the data, or immediately after the last user saved the last file, there were some files that were not backed up and so were not restored. So his work, as seemingly heroic, though not really, as it might be, didn't really get the job done.
But as you say, it's probably a policy problem. He didn't have guidance, or he acted on his own. Yeah. Tad, from a forensic standpoint, what did the technician's actions do to limit your responses?
Well, this is the worst case scenario for post-breach. Think about a physical investigation that police conduct. If you're trying to investigate who did something and you wipe away the fingerprints, it becomes that much harder for them to find the suspect. As we translate that into the digital realm, when you reformat the drives, when you reset the system, what you have in essence done is wiped away the majority of the forensic data that we in the forensics business can then go in and find and and follow the trail of breadcrumbs. Why is that important? Because if we can follow that trail of breadcrumbs about what the actor did while they were in your system, what they encrypted, what they accessed, how they got in, what piece of ransomware they used, that can be the difference between us being able to restore your system to you free of rootkits, free of backdoors. It can be the difference between us being able to restore your control of your data back to you with limited exposure. Without these things, we just can't do it.
Right. So, Alex, if you look at this after this technician's actions, has this impacted the ability to, get reimbursement from insurance?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it raises a lot of issues that are problematic from an insurance standpoint. So, we spoke before about there being a duty of cooperation with your insurance company. If you go ahead and take unilateral action, the insurance company can disavow a lot of what you've done if something bad arises out of that unilateral action that you took without their permission. So it depends on your policy, its language, and all that stuff definitely needs to be looked at from the standpoint of how well covered you are for any type of cyber event. Determining coverage is also made difficult because the insurance company might come to you and say, well, we don't have enough information to make a coverage determination, or we might actually say, because there's no information, then there is no coverage. So you have to think about all these issues, and again, the first thing you should do is pick up the phone and call people, because taking unilateral action can have very far-reaching effects, including your insurance coverage, and or if there's something has been stolen and you didn't know about it until much too late and you get sued, there can also be spoliation issues, jury charges, and other legal ramifications as well.
So, in this response to one of the questions we received during the presentation, you know, in a ransomware situation, obviously, if the ransomware is doing just the encryption of data on your system and denying you access to your information, does that trigger a notification concern for which you'd need to seek legal counsel on how to respond? What are your thoughts on that, Alex?
Yeah, no, I think, you know, from a standpoint of looking at the breach and seeing what you can find out, if you've overwritten everything, then you have a problem because you can't determine one way or another whether something has been stolen and anything that has happened to you apart from the ransomware being installed. And if that happens, you know, you're sort of flying blind, as they say. But if you do pick up the phone and call someone, there are a lot of things, as Tad pointed out, that you can determine from what's going on. You might not be able to crack the code, but you can certainly determine what's going on and make some decisions based on that. And one of those decisions is, you know, who do you tell? And you know, a lot of issues arise with whether or not you have to advise clients, whether or not you have to go to regulatory authorities, and of course, you definitely need to report this to the criminal authorities that if you've been breached to a certain extent. But all of those issues, whether or not to report and who to report to, they certainly can't be done unless you go through legal counsel, and that's something that you definitely need to do immediately, and that's one of your first calls to make.
So Tad, Alex made a point about the technician's actions. If the technician hadn't overwritten everything, hadn't reformatted the drives, are you able to, through forensic analysis, understand which files they touched or didn't touch?
Absolutely. Absolutely. If the technician had done what he should have done, which is just simply take that device, take that singular computer off the network and just set it aside and call us in, we would be able to go in and figure out everything that malicious actor did while they were in the system. It's called spider lining. We follow the spider lines, we follow the spider web from the single point of where the ransomware, where the hack was discovered, and then we follow it out to figure out how they got into the system. Once they were in the system, what did they do? What was the trail that they took from entry into the system to encryption of the data package? All of these things help us build a larger picture of what the true extent of the ransomware, what the true extent of the breach is on the network, on the system, and then on the data.
And then, Alex suggested, the involvement of law enforcement to potentially, get involved in the case. One of the upsides of doing that, I guess there's two really, is on the one hand, you get more intelligence as a society about what these bad actors are doing and the methods through which they're doing it. So that's a sort of a herd protection, that obviously if you let law enforcement know. Secondly, they probably have information about the particular virus and its use. So if you know which files they touch, you may be able to make a more informed decision about whether or not you have a breach notification obligation. Because if you know this particular virus, not only is associated with the encryption of the data, but also is highly associated with rootkits and other exfiltration, which is, I guess, what you cyber people call, stealing my data, then maybe my concern or the tendency to lead towards a breach notification goes up. On the other hand, if you have really strong reasons to know that, even in the case of the technician doing what he did, that there is a really, really low chance that any data was exfiltrated, you may not trigger a breach notification obligation to anyone whose data was touched. But knowing through forensic investigation which data and which files was touched is really important information for you and your legal team to make a determination about how that's going to trigger the next steps.
Yep.
So how else do we see companies affected? Rick, maybe you could take a shot at this.
Yeah, sure. Just looking at the slide, publicity, direct costs, and indirect costs. Nobody, no client, no customer, no person who trusts you to provide confidential services and to protect their confidential data wants to learn that confidential and private information of theirs has been breached, has been accessed by somebody who has no right to access it. And so that pretty quickly takes a bit of the shine off of the breached organization's reputation, right? And you've got direct costs of having to pay for, after a breach, potentially pay for credit monitoring, the rebuilding of systems, the retaining of legal counsel, insurance experts, forensics experts, and those costs, as the slide tells us, add up pretty quickly, right? At $12.60 per record, if you are an average size organization, maybe a few million records, that gets pretty darn expensive, with one click of the mouse, so to speak.
And if I were to look at most of our customers in the consulting arm, and even putting other hats on, we see, I don't think people appreciate just how many records they have that contain personally identifying information or confidential information. The number is staggering, and if you just take a moment to sort of look through your inbox, you'll start to realize how much personal information, because what is defined as personally identifying information varies from state to state and varies in different contexts. But in some of the most broad definitions are incredibly wide. I mean,
the broadest definition, right? A person's name and a person's home address.
Which is in every phone book.
Every phone book, almost every email signature. People talk about where they live and who they are all the time.
Right, so, it's funny that that's considered personally identifying information, but under the new White House standards that they published, name and address is personally identifying information. So that's a tough standard. Moving on, and I think we've sort of danced around this up until now, but let's just say it, right? How would a breach response plan or an incident response plan have helped this situation, Rick?
So the question assumes facts not yet in evidence, so let's put them there, right? If there is a plan,
now you're the lawyer.
If I play one on audio, and I don't really, for the audience's sake. So if in fact that plan exists, was communicated, was discussed, if people within the organization, and when I say people within the organization, I pretty much mean every person within the organization has some knowledge, more granular knowledge than others of the plan, then it would have instantly let that IT person know what he in this case should have done, who he should have called, notified, etc. It would have brought a framework of organization and thoroughly thought through processes, step by step, of how to respond and what to do. And would have prevented potentially the instant overwriting of data, some of which may exist today and some may not, and also would have prevented the corruption of forensic evidence.
Now, a breach response plan is obviously a very specific document, right? It's not something you can just download from a Bloomberg form and get your handy-dandy breach response plan. If it's going to be at all useful, it has to be targeted to the organization. So when you help organizations do a draft a breach response plan, and I guess this is really to Rick and Tad, what stakeholders do you want to engage in that process?
Tad, I'll take a quick shot at it, then hand it off to be all yours. As I suggested a few moments ago, everybody is a stakeholder, right? Every employee in an organization runs the risk of being unemployed should something hugely negative happen to that organization.
Yeah, but you got a lot of cooks in the kitchen then.
A lot of cooks in the kitchen then. So what you really need to do is focus it. You need management involved. You need IT involved, business development, marketing, consultants you have, third-party consultants, not employed directly by the organization even, to consult on legal issues, forensic issues, et cetera. You can get template policy documents from any number of places, but as Alan suggested, the template is not nearly enough to get a policy in place, to write a policy. It needs to be tailored to your organization.
And of course, the policy is just the goal. If an incident response plan to be at all effective, it has to operationalize the aspirational aspects of the policy. So it's fine to say in a breach response plan, call a lawyer or call TAD or call, whatever. But it has to actually have a number. TAD has to know that he's going to get that call. It has to be operationalized, not just be aspirational or goal-driven, right?
Yeah, so you've got three important considerations there, right? One is communication to all the stakeholders and everybody who might be called upon to assist in the response. Another is testing the breach response plan, right? Don't just write a document and send it to people. Go through tabletop tasks, right? Describe a scenario and talk through how each and every person would respond.
Ted, who do you want to have around the table when you're doing a breach response plan?
I agree with everything that Rick said. If you look at us, let's go at the large picture. Societally, we're the most connected that we've ever been at any time in human history. And the way that we have brought those connections internally into our businesses is unprecedented. The access to information, the dispensation of information, of data, and of access is really unprecedented at this point. Rick touched on the most important thing you can do to prepare for these types of situations. You educate yourself. If you're educated, then you can prepare. If you're prepared, then you can train. And if you can train, you can be ready when these situations come up. So for me, it's having a technical lead, it's having a management lead, it's having a crisis communications lead, it's having a internal employee lead, and then it's having a external client or stakeholders lead. Let's remember that this is a team sport. No one person should have the responsibility to make these calls on their own, not even someone in management. Everybody needs to work together if you're going to mitigate the effects of a breach, or if you're going to get far left of a breach and mitigate it from ever occurring.
I agree 100%. We talked about a Bitcoin. I don't want to dwell on this slide too long, but I watched the Brit exit. I've watched the Bitcoin for another presentation I gave a month or two ago, and I've been looking at these things. And of course, the ransom is a Bitcoin, and we say it's typically $500. Well, the Bitcoin has soared in value, and I didn't look at it today after the British exit, but I hear anecdotally that it's even gone up higher because it's such a ridiculous thing, right? But I guess any commodity is. Like a diamond has no real value intrinsically other than its scarcity, right? It does, unless you're using it as a drill, it doesn't really do anything for you. It's just shiny, but cubic zirconia does that too, right? So people, I get asked that a lot. What's a Bitcoin? Ted, can you sort of help people so the Bitcoin today, I just thought $650. So it's gone up even more. So if in May I had bought them, I probably wouldn't need to be hawking you all for work. I could retire on my Bitcoin collection. But I'm too much of I didn't do it.
Gold, lead, and Bitcoin.
Gold, lead, and Bitcoins, right? If you want to hedge, buy Bitcoins. What is a Bitcoin?
So a Bitcoin is just it's a type of digital currency in which encryption techniques are used to regulate the generation of the units of currency. And so, to put it bluntly, it's a digital dollar, but it's a digital dollar whose generation is drastically controlled, and because of that control and because of the encryption on it, the value isn't one-to-one to the dollar. The value is how many Bitcoins are out there versus what is the value of the dollar. So what does this mean? What does this actually mean, right? Because that's great. Okay, it's digital currency. Sure, wonderful. What it actually means is that by encrypting the currency is actually it's 100% clean, and it is 100% untraceable. And that is why it has very fast become the going currency for the black market, to include malicious actors in the cyber realm with ransomware and data sets and data packages.
And we talked about the cost, right? A Bitcoin 500. With the Bitcoin trading at 650 now, and you have to pay 1 or 2 Bitcoins, getting your computer back is $1,000. But for an organization that has more than one computer impacted, it can add up pretty quickly.
Yeah, it can, Alan. I mean, look, this is one of these things that when you look at the profile of a lot of these malicious actors, the goal for them is to get into your system as quickly as they can, deploy the ransomware, milk you for all you're worth, and then get out. The thought that these people are putting into the attacks, the majority of these attacks are targets of opportunity. They found an expired email address, and they tried a password, and they just happened to get in. The very few of these attacks these days are coordinated attacks. And so once they get in, the whole point is to extract as much value from you as simply as they can, as fast as they can, and then disappear back into the web. And that's why the Bitcoin is it's such a beautiful delivery device. There's no need to quantify the value of your data. There's no need to quantify the value of your business. Online, your business is just a set of numbers. It's the data package, it's the amount of money you have in your accounts, but they don't care if you're Goldman Sachs or if you're a small community bank.
They'll get you. So, we've talked about Bitcoins. Rick, maybe and we're talking about now risk reduction strategies. We've covered, an incident response plan generically, but what are some of the steps that, you could take if you were running an IT system to reduce the risks of the installation of malware, or frankly any other ransomware or any other type of bad action on your network? What are some of the steps you can take? I mean, we have a list here, but you could highlight the ones that matter.
Yeah, we have a list, and we can highlight some of them, right? Who's on the network, what computers are on the network, what accounts are enabled. So what we're really talking about is understanding your information assets, right? The users represent a set of assets, the computers represent a set of assets, as does the data. So you really need to have an inventory of those assets, and you can get that through a network diagram, a data diagram, which explains and illustrates and quantifies the who's, the what's, and the where's on the system, which then, to follow the next W in line, the why, why should one of the users have access to one of the pieces of information? So you need to do an analysis of the rights that users have. Back to the simple example I used earlier, does an HR guy really need access to the finance system and vice versa? And another consideration is looking at, for Windows, the Windows operating system specifically, every copy of that ships with an administrator account, which gives access to everything related to Windows on the particular system. So a typical ploy by bad guys is to try to exploit the administrator account. So very quickly and simply, just rename it to something that doesn't include the word administrator or admin, as one very simplistic takeaway from all this. And also, as part of the network diagram, look and understand whether, work very, very, very closely with your IT people and push them for good answers, responsive answers to your questions, so that you understand what the heck these IT people, we IT people, are talking about. But talk to them about user rights and network segmentation, right? If a virus gets to your network, to a certain portion or segment of your network, can it very easily, because there are no technical controls in place, be transmitted to other portions of your network? Can it, by extension, also that malware, find its way across trusted or federated networks that you might have in place with trusted vendors, clients, customers.
That's the target
consultants. Yeah, exactly. The target gets huge, right? Oh, the breach by
right.
target.
The HVAC system was the company that ran their HVAC system was infected with malware. It jumped from them because they had a trusted relationship with the target enterprise and infected target.
Exactly. And one way to help combat malware, though not exactly ransomware, but we'll touch on it, is encrypting your data. And more we see financial institutions and others who hold millions of people, millions of records, and then some of confidential information want their business partners to encrypt their data both in transit and at rest.
And Tad, how does encrypting the data limit your breach notification? And maybe this is also for Alex. How does encrypting the data minimize your risk?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's a good question. I think, from the standpoint of looking at your risk picture, if you can render the data that you have in your system for all intents and purposes unusable if it's stolen, it drastically changes your risk picture as far as what you can be exposed to from lawsuits by customers, from people using your data against you, espionage and other things. Although, and Tad, you can chime in here, I don't think it's not a complete answer to your issues, because someone can still lock your system and encrypt over your encryption, so you could still be held for ransom that way.
Ted?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, I hope it's not just because where my specialty lies in this area is on data encryption and data security. I hope that's not the only reason I feel it's the most important. That said, I certainly feel like the data is the most important piece of the puzzle. That's not to say that system security is not incredibly important. It's just that if the system is compromised, it's horrible, it's terrible, but if your data is secure, then your data is still secure. When you encrypt the data, what you're really doing is saying there are certain permissions and controls that are placed on that data on who can read it. So let's look at it like a lock and a key. You create and you generate these digital keys, and then you disseminate these keys to the people inside your network, which allows them to put their key in the lock and unlock that data. If the data is encrypted and you don't have the key, you cannot access the data. That's incredibly important, but it really is only one piece of the data encryption, data security equation right now. Today, we have the opportunity through new and exciting best-in-breed technologies where we can also visualize the data and manage the data. So really, what does that mean? If I have some of this software, and there's a couple, Global Data Sentinel is one out of New York City, Ionic Security out of Atlanta, it's end-to-end encryption. So I encrypt the data. I then disseminate the keys to those who need access to it, and I write the policies that state who can access the data, when, what, why, how, down to a very granular level. You can control geolocation, you can control device, browser, time, etc. So that's incredible for the security side. But what a lot of these new programs allow us to do is also to visualize who is opening what piece of data, when they're opening it, and from that you can really tell intent. If I notice that someone is in their office every single day from 9 p.m. to 11 p.m., and they're accessing data that they really don't need to be accessing, and they're there at night, I can assume that there's something weird going on there. Conversely, I can also say if I notice a data package is currently being looked at, say 3 to 5 a.m. by some general accounting account that we created 5 years ago, there's something going on there that sets off a bell. And it's all of these little triggers which help you to bring together a more complete and a more robust data security package.
So, I think, and as, sort of the core to our service offering is, you need technology that's going to be doing some of the stuff that Tad just identified. You need training that I think Rick has touched on a lot, and we're going to do it a little bit more. But you also need strong policies that are actually implemented to your environment, not just a paper tiger that you download from a website somewhere, but are actually tailored and modified to actually speak to the applications and the systems that you run. Alex, we hear these terms all the time: ISO 27001, NIST, COVID. What are these things?
Right. Well, these are industry standard policies and procedures that are promulgated by industry groups as guidance for sort of your minimal or your a set of best practices for you to establish policies and procedures for information security and cybersecurity within your company. And they're promulgated by various groups, international standards, the national standards, and whatnot. But I think what you stressed is really important, because this is not a one-size-fits-all thing. These are guidance for us, and part of what we do in our consulting practice here at HB Solutions, and particularly with our fantastic new product, which is HB Access, is we sit down with you, we learn your business, we figure out exactly how to tailor policies and procedures for you and your company that are best suited so that you can go about what you do on a daily basis, knowing that you have the right policies and procedures in place. And it's guidelines, but it's certainly something that we work with, and we also will be able to guide you towards legal representation as far as regulations are concerned. If you are in an industry that requires further or additional guidance, particularly if it's HIPAA in the healthcare realm, or for the financial groups, the SEC and other regulatory organizations, or if you do business in the EU, there's a whole bunch of regulators that you need to figure into the equation as well.
And then, Rick, the last element, and you've identified them as, in your mind, the biggest risk to any organization, is the human considerations. And I think you and Tad both touched on them. How we get duped. Just what are some of the things that an organization can do to minimize the risk that its people pose to its data?
Yeah, and the people, as you said, Alan, as Tad and I said earlier, the people are perhaps the biggest risk, the biggest set of vulnerabilities that every organization has, right? That they're susceptible to social engineering. We saw a statistic from IBM, the Ponemon Institute, that phishing, which is an example of social engineering, 93% of phishing emails contain ransomware, right? So that's the topic today. So what you need to do, a good recommendation to deal with the human considerations here, are to have testing and training done. Testing, training, testing, training, testing, right? It's cyclical. And social engineering testing tests everything from USB drives dropped in a parking lot to determine if anybody will plug them into a computer, to how they respond to phishing emails, to how they respond to phone calls requesting access to certain data, or telling somebody a user's password.
And let me just stop you for 2 seconds, because we're getting close to the end of the program. But Tad, this is pretty inexpensive to implement. If you want to actually test to see how compliant your users are, and I think you should, because you can write policies, you can send people to training, you can sit in courses and have free sandwiches and learn about cybersecurity all you want. But until you can actually show someone that they failed and they need to take this stuff seriously, it doesn't really ruminate. How much does it cost to bring a team in of ethical hackers to find the weak links in your organization?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, Alan. For most companies, you're probably looking at only about 2 to 3 days with these individuals deploying on site and off site as well, and running social engineering tests on your people. So I would say about 2 to 3 days, and usually it comes in, for these types of tests, it's under $10,000. It's more in the $6,000 to $7,000 range, which when you look at that in comparison against what you potentially stand to lose if spear phishing attacks are successful on your company, it's really a small price to pay for ensuring that the weakest part of the security architecture feels confident in their own way to be a part of this security architecture. You can't just expect that your employees are going to be able to handle these situations if they pop up. If you don't train them, and if you don't test them, and then you don't teach them, what can you really expect from them?
So, in the minute we have remaining, please write your questions. We'll do it. I think I can also unmute this thing, so if someone is adverse to typing, I can do that as well. But we'll see how that works if it gets too noisy. But I just wanted to tell you a little bit about HB Access and what we're doing. We're approaching this from a policy, human systems, and technical approach, and we're trying to help organizations bring all three of these to bear so that their risk is minimized. Because if an operation has to engage in risk to succeed in this world, but you don't want to not appreciate that risk. And what we want to do is help you as organizations identify, minimize, and move forward in light of identified risk so that you can achieve the business goals that make you the special company that you are. And if you focus just on buying a new widget, to strengthen your perimeter, that's not going to do it in and of itself. It's important. You need antivirus. You need that, but you need network segmentation. You need to do all these things, but you also need to have strong policies. So like that poor IT technician does what he needs to do in the middle of the night, and you need people not clicking on viruses, not doing the things they need to do. So bringing all three of those prongs to bear at the problem, I think is an important and unique aspect of our service offering, and is something that we're really proud and excited about. This slide kind of shows again how all three comes together. And the power is enabling you to move forward in light of these risks, and that's what we work so hard to achieve. We have a few minutes left for final thoughts. I've got a service offering of the areas that we give, and of course this is the sale part of this, but think about it, you got 60 minutes, 10 seconds to this. This is the sales thing. It's on our website. I do hope you'll take a moment to call. So to open it up to final thoughts, I'll unmute the call here. So
the conference has been unmuted.
So if you want to ask a question, feel free. And in the meantime, final thoughts, Rick?
Communicate with and train all of the persons in your organization. Identify those through testing. You might need a bit more communication. Focus on them, and then do it all over again.
And Chad, final thoughts?
So the average time to detect a breach in your system is 170 days. But once somebody has breached your system, the time it takes to hurt your credibility, steal your data, ransom your data, etc., 60 seconds or less. So what I would say is right now, somewhere in the world, there is a hacker thinking about hacking you and your company. The question is, are you thinking about them?
And the answer is probably no. But hopefully everyone in this call is. Alex, final thoughts?
Yeah, I think the key for me is I don't know if everyone's seen the movie Glengarry Glen Ross, but the expression ABC in that movie, always be closing. In this instance, it should always be improving, ABI. That's really the watchword. You should always be improving your information security systems, protocols, and techniques. And again, that's the one great thing about the HB Access is that it's a soup to nuts approach on all levels. It addresses the technical, it addresses the human, it addresses the policy and regulatory, and of course, it's there to help you if a breach occurs. So, I mean, that's the word for me the words for me to live by is ABI. Always be improving. Never think that if you just check a box, you've got a firewall or you've got Norton antivirus, you've done enough. You've got to always be trying to stay a step ahead.
So the mic's open. If any of you have a question, please feel free to ask it. We, in response to one of the written questions, these materials in the talk will be on our website. It's HP Solutions, so please, feel free to click there for it. I don't think it's going to be up just yet because they gotta copy it down and do all that sort of stuff, but it should be there pretty shortly. It sounds like there's no questions, but you have contact information here. Call or write, and any of us would be really excited to work with you if you have an interest and a need in the area of information security.
No, I couldn't find anything else right away.
So thank you all.
Thanks all.